Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to see you guys. Happy November. What I love most and miss the most probably right now during our civic program year is the chance for the personal connections. And I love getting to know everyone. And so I thought to lighten up what has been an incredibly stressful week, I am sure for most of us, I thought I'd send you a picture of my sweet dog, Daisy, who has absolutely not forgiven either myself or Dogtown for the ridiculous outfit that she had to wear on Halloween picture day. So hopefully that brought some smiles to your face today. It's hard to believe that we are already in November. I realized today that there is only 56 days left in the calendar year. So that for somebody who likes to achieve a lot is a little stressful. I'm sure you feel the same way. Speaking about coming towards the end of the year, this would be the time when our office would have been heavily preparing for the Darden Awards. And it is with a very heavy heart that because of COVID-19, we had to postpone this event. And so this event would normally bring out over 550 of the who's who in the region. So we're upset that we're not able to do it, but we think that this was the right move. It's a way to keep everybody safe, especially as flu season starts to kick in as well. We do ask, however, that date, which is November the 18th, stays on your calendar for now. We are working to see if there is a program that we may be able to offer. It is not confirmed yet, but more details will come soon. So we'll send you an email just as a reminder, but that date on your calendar was one of the dates that we had out there on your original schedule, and that's November the 18th. It is not a compulsory event, so if you have something else going on, it is okay. So the election on Tuesday night has certainly capped off a very unique year. I was thankful to see that the election day was peaceful, and so far it looks like the protests have been so too. It is my hope that no matter what the outcome is, we can learn and move forward to tackle the crippling issues our country faces together. I feel like we need to recalibrate though, and look at what we can do to make a difference in 2021. A number of you have actually already reached out and shared that you're interested in being part of the recovery efforts or some of the other large scale initiatives. As I've said many times, your talents are definitely needed, and it will be the business leaders in the region collectively that will lead Hampton Roads. So if there is a connection that we can help you to make, please make sure you reach out either to myself or to Amasa or to Megan, and we will make that happen. I'm really grateful to our civic team, Amasa Smith and Megan Shuford, for their hard work in planning and executing our programming. So this is where your little reaction buttons come into play. If there's anything that we can do to improve your experience, I hope that you will let our team know. We really appreciate those of you who were able to fill in the survey that we sent to you for the opening. If you haven't had the chance to do that, it's not too late. We want to hear from you. Of course, this year is a little different to what we've experienced in the past, and we want to make sure that you're getting the very, very most out of this under the circumstances that we're in. Before we get started though, I wanted to open the floor up to the group for any announcements that you might like to share. Whether it's like Stephen Griffin, who shared in Base Camp about the new CEO at the port, very exciting, or community support that is needed for a nonprofit. If we were all in person, these types of conversations would happen very naturally, like during the coffee breaks and at lunch. So I figured to perhaps kickstart the meeting off. I know that Aaron actually has some information that he'd like to share with you on an upcoming community fundraiser that he is spearheading with his nonprofit Rouse's House. Aaron, are you able to unmute yourself and just kind of share with everybody some of those details and maybe see if there's some help that you might need? They can maybe step up to the plate.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Good to see everybody here this morning. So I have a great opportunity I like to do with my classmates, if you all are available, this Saturday, November the 14th, from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Red Wing Park, and I'll give you all this information by way of email. But if you all are available, I would like for you to come help hand out turkeys and non-perishable items. It will be a drive-through, so it will be very safe. And all the registrants so far, we're up to 200 and plus registrants. And you don't have to, you just hand them turkeys and the perishable items and they keep it going. But This is the way to give back to the community during this time. As we know, COVID has really affected our families, our friends, and our personal lives as well. So this is a way for us to give back. And if you're available, I'd love to have you all come out on Saturday the 14th.
That's awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much. So
Hey, Aaron, hey, quick question, Sarah. Aaron, is this a family thing at all, or should we just bring ourselves?
Yeah, so you should bring yourselves only because of COVID restrictions that the state has placed on us. So
Got it.
Yeah.
that was a great question, Ryan. Thank you so much. That really was a good question. Does anybody else have any questions for Aaron on this? It's a great opportunity, and we actually did something similar with the food bank with some of our alumni. We had some of our civic scholars come out as well, and it's a really awesome way for you all to be able to connect together and also give back to the community as well. Aaron, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Any other announcements or things that you want to share? Any kind of cool things, maybe if you're working in an environment where people can come visit, maybe at the museums, or any other cool things out there?
Thank you, Sarah Jane.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to let everyone know that Virginia Mocha is open Thursday through Sunday. Time ticketing, very safe. And we'd love to see you out there. We're also partnering with Symphonicity. And I wish I had the details in front of me. I will send them out to everyone. But we're having several performances with Symphonicity where they are, it's a progressive concert where we have just a couple of musicians in a gallery or a room, and then you and your group with either your family or a socially distant group of people will move from room to room to hear the various pieces of music being played. So we're experimenting on how to provide socially distant cultural experiences. So I will send that information out to everyone, but we would love, love, love to see you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Any other question? Actually, does anybody have any questions for Gary? No questions. Good. And yeah, we'll definitely make sure we send out these. We can also put them, please feel free to use Basecamp as well as things come to mind. So if you don't have anything to share right now, that is a-okay, but our little community in Basecamp will definitely be a good hub for us to do those types of things. Anybody else for the good of the order before we continue?
This is Jane.
Hey, Jane.
I do just want to give everybody a heads up that in January, we are in the process of finalizing a date for an executive briefing on early childhood, and really trying to, will feature Dr. Ron Ferguson, who's a professor of economics at Harvard and has done a lot of research. He's the director of the Achievement Gap. And so we will be inviting all of you all, and then asking you to share as well with other community leaders, senior community leaders, business folks, but really just trying to kind of think about how we support families in early childhood. So just wanted to give you a heads up that that's going to be coming. We'll probably send a save the date to you as soon as we get the details. It'll be a lunchtime thing, but just want to say, please feel free to share it widely.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Those types of events are really important. And it's nice when you have a cohort of people that can come out and support you too. So thank you. I see that Meredith has written in the chat about the Chrysler exhibits that they have right now. So please go ahead and take a look in the chat. She sent you a link so you can take some of those links away with you and sign up. Again, we should put some of these into Basecamp as well. Anybody else? I'm so
Jane, got one more quick.
Hey, Darius, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you all this morning?
Good, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Just want to let everyone know as well that on November 20th through the 22nd, the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia will still be holding the Mayflower Marathon. And so that is a drive-through event, Pembroke Mall in Virginia Beach, and also the Kroger Marketplace in Suffolk. And there's also an online donation portal as well. And I can place that information in the chat. So we just want to encourage everyone. There's still need out there. So please, if you can't make it to one of the drive-through sites, there's an online giving portal as well. So
That's awesome and perfect timing for today. I'm sure you saw in your agenda. So that is
Yes.
awesome. Awesome. Thank you for the plug. I know that they'll be proud of that. So I'll give you full credit. So yeah, please do put that in the chat. So anybody else, I want to make sure if there's anyone else, it is kind of hard, I know, on Zoom to know when to speak. So I'm going to stop and let you guys type in. We're good. Thumbs ups. All right. So with that being said, thank you all so much. We're going to give opportunities throughout the program year for us to be able to kind of spotlight some of the things that are going on. As a reminder, the agenda and the full speaker bios are all in Basecamp and in emails from Amesa, but to recap our agenda briefly, we begin today by addressing the week's presidential election, politics in Virginia, and a more in-depth look at the Dillon Rule with Quentin Kidd. And then we are moving into a transportation session. It's always a hot button subject here in the 757. We'll be joined by Bob Crum, Executive Director for HRPDC and HRPTO, and Kevin Page, Executive Director for HR TAC. We will learn how to decipher the alphabet soup of acronyms and look at significant transportation-focused projects happening now and what is planned for the future. After lunch, we're excited to welcome some of our alumni as guests who will be listening in on the offshore wind panel. We're joined by Paul Olson and with Old Dominion University, John Larson with Dominion Energy, Kathy Vick with the Port of Virginia, and Nicole Riff with the Hampton Roads Alliance. The session will be followed by Secretary of Finance for the Commonwealth, Aubrey Lane, who will discuss the impacts of COVID at the statewide level. Our final sessions will include a presentation from Dr. Sin Romero, who will speak about COVID's impact on the future health of our community, which will lead directly into a joint presentation from the Peninsula and Southside Food Banks. Dr. Ruth Jones and Karen Joyner will discuss food insecurity and the impact of the pandemic. Now, we want to give you a few moments to chat in some smaller groups before we begin our first session. So I'm seeing lots of smiles as you guys come back, so that's good. Hopefully you've had some fun. Anybody got something majorly interesting to share with us from the breakout room?
I think one thing that that we came together on was the thought of, what do we do when we are actually looking at communication that is going to be virtual like this, rather than in person. So on both sides, we do have new ideas of implementing virtual context in the new era. On the other side, also, there is a need to do in-person things, which are, very important when you're dealing with actually deeper, complex topics as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. It is a very, very hard thing to do, isn't it? And I know in part of our survey, we actually put out for Civic whether folks would be interested in a hybrid program. And we're currently right now working on the technical side to that so that we can do it and make sure that whether you are with us or whether you are in a virtual setting, that you'll have this similar kind of experience. It is hard. It's not an easy topic. So thank you, Macbeth, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Any other major revelations? No?
Well, I would just share for me, the biggest issue that we're going to deal with is policy, because we have just so many policies here, and all of the policies that have anything to do with working refer to workplace. So we really do need to rethink and restructure a lot of policies around home-based working, teleworking, that kind of thing. So that's going to be a major undertaking for me. And I think across across all of the community colleges in the state, in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about like the best practices and also making sure that everybody has that equal access. I mean, it's hard right now, isn't it? Yeah.
And accountability
right.
Is going to be a huge piece too.
Yeah. Has that been, have you all found that challenge? You can just use your reactions or your thumbs up. Have you found that challenging with your teams to keep people motivated and keep them so that they're on track and keeping projects on track? Yeah, a couple of thumbs up. Some folks are like, I don't know. Yeah, I still feel like I'm in March. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, it is challenging to keep that motivation up. And when you're not seeing people face to face, how much is that contact? How much is too much? And then do you end up being a micromanager because you need to stay on top of things and you want to give the creativity as well? So we are going to do one more breakout room, unless Aaron, do you want to take us away? Yes, sir.
Oh, no, I was just going to add from a city perspective, Virginia Beach, I think we're dealing with obviously retention and attracting a lot of young workers, specifically in the public sector, so to speak, which we cannot compete against private sector dollars. But as Dr. Marcia just stated, it's policy where you're going to have to be innovative and attract younger talent that's used to using technology, that's not used to maybe doesn't like dressing up in collared shirts and dress wear every day, but want to be in comfortable wear. And also, how do you really manage and structure benefit packages where you may not be able to offer a higher salary, but you can structure a benefit package that can attract a younger type of workforce. So that's something post-COVID is definitely is on, I'm sure, everyone's radar. And how do you attract that new workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it provides us with opportunities, right? I mean, you could have people working anywhere in the country for some positions, not obviously in the city entity, but then on top of that, it's making sure that you're remaining competitive, especially for our region in particular. So yeah, thank you, Aaron. Is there anybody else who'd like to share anything? Because these are great conversations. Okay. I'm given that gap. It's always an uncomfortable. Well, go ahead, Gary. Thank you.
One of the things that we started doing, just because I didn't know how to move forward, was literally after we shut down, we started talking every morning. Number one, Microsoft Teams, hallelujah, love that. Secondly, like, we got on the phone just to check in with each other. I mean, we did a Teams thing just to check in with each other, just to make sure everyone was okay, and we're moving things along as we could. And that has become a fixture. We've gotten really good at it. It's no longer an hour. It's between 15 and 30 minutes. And my senior leadership team doesn't want to do away with it. Like, that morning check-in. And there's some people who come every day, and there's some people who, have a pass and only come a couple of days, has become just an essential in terms of everyone knowing what's going on in the organization. And we've offered to stop it, and they're like, no, we love this. So
yeah, that's a great way to stay connected and give them the opportunity where it's not a compulsory meeting, that they can come and go as they please if they want to, do that FaceTime. Because, I don't know about you all, but I feel like now meetings in particular, it's that's all you're doing all day long, right? And then at the end of the day, you're trying to do the actual work that's come from those meetings too. So it's trying to balance the two to make sure everybody is on track, but also that there's enough time for, them to be able to complete whatever projects there are. So I'm going to pick on somebody who's been very quiet. Chris, how are you doing in your line of work? Chris is with PRA, and I would love to hear how that is working for you guys. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I do find that intriguing.
No problem. So it varies for us. For those who don't know, we're largely a call center operation. And I'll speak primarily to our US operations because we can go a lot of different ways in Europe. But in the US, we operate, 7 call centers across 5 different states. And so that's been the most challenging. It's just jockeying through those different state, regulations and governor's orders and pronouncements. But we have largely kept our call centers in the office throughout. There's a lot of regulatory schemes around privacy and data that we can't have them working from home. But we have removed the entire back office executive support functions to work from home. And, not knock on wood, 10 months later, it's been relatively seamless.
Yeah.
So far, so good. I was just talking with Ryan in our breakout session. I think we're well into the spring before we start, moving away from that model, and maybe later, depending upon where we go from here.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Sure. It's a different industry that your challenges are a little different, perhaps, to some of the other challenges out there. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Of course.
No, I think later on today, actually, when we have Secretary Lane, this will be a conversation that you all will be intrigued by. I've heard him speak several times, and I do believe he is thinking that the norm is not going to be looking until at least, honestly, 2022 is what he was saying, the beginning of 2022. That doesn't mean that we're going to stay as we are, status quo. It just means that the normal activities that we're used to would not start until that 2022 timeframe. So with that being said, we do actually have our next speaker here, and I want to make sure we do get some chance for some more breakout rooms. I know we have a optional breakout session at the very end of the day, but as we get through the day today, there may be some times where we can break you off. I'll offer again at lunchtime if anybody has, somebody that they haven't connected with and they're like, gosh, I would really love to do that. You guys can message between the two of you and then just send an email send a message to Megan and she can give you, say, a 15-minute window during the lunch period at the very beginning, just so that you can do a breakout room separately. So everybody feeling good? Everybody okay? Hanging in there with me? All right. Sorry that we're not giving you too many brain breaks, but we're going to get there in the end. So as a reminder, and you guys have been great this morning, all of our sessions today are interactive. Our speakers are prepared to give an overview of the session and answer your questions. And to make things easy in the chat function, I know last time we had you type out the entire question, and sometimes that's hard to listen to what the information is being given to you and then type that question at the same time to make sure it's eloquent. So the easiest way to do this is to type the word question. And then when we move to the Q&A, or if there's an opportunity to bring you forward for a question in between conversations, we certainly will do that. I will call upon you individually. Please make sure you unmute yourself and introduce yourself before asking the question. I think we'll all have our questions ready for our first presenter after a very long 2 days of election coverage and perhaps some confusion as well. It is my great honor to introduce a dear friend of Civic. Quentin Kidd is the Dean of the College of Social Sciences, Professor of Political Science, and Academic Director of the Wasson Center for Public Policy at Christopher Newport University. If you've watched any political coverage over the last few days, or even over the last few years, chances are you have seen Quentin. He appears on radio and television programs in Virginia, as well as nationally and internationally, to talk about politics and public policy. When we host a session on politics, Quentin is our go-to expert. I'm not sure that Quentin has had the chance to sleep in the last several days, but we truly appreciate him joining us today. Quentin, I will pass it over to you now. The country is on the edge of its seat. We have a tall order for you today. Can you tell us everything you know and what has surprised you most so far? Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you for having me all. I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, all right.
Yes, sir.
I have no idea what's going to happen. No.
All right, session ended. Everybody go.
Yeah, we're over. After that introduction, I'm just going to stop right there. Look, what's happening right now is what everybody sort of knew was going to happen. I mean, we've got. I'll talk about just a few words nationally, and then talk about Virginia. But we have more people who voted absentee early, in person, or by mail in the history of this country, and so we knew, because of the way that works, that it was going to take longer to count votes. It's a physics problem that's easily worked through. There are 4 states in the country that do universal mail balloting: Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and Colorado. Those 4 states are well practiced at this, and the returns in those 4 states, aren't delayed at all, because basically when they get a ballot in those states, they process it and they count it and they just hold the vote, and they count and they don't release until election day. The rest of us, quite frankly, are learning how to do this as we speak right now. And so that's the delay. And then so that's one thing that we knew. And then we also knew that some states would be more delayed than other states, because some states don't allow ballots to even be processed prior to election day. Other states do allow ballots to be processed. Some states allow ballots to be counted, but the results held. And so Virginia, for example, Virginia's law changed July 1, where we allow no excuse absentee voting, either in person or by mail. And we allow local registrars to process ballots. And what that means is verify signatures on envelopes, open the envelopes, things like that. But then the ballots themselves get put in a pile, and they can't be counted until election day. Pennsylvania doesn't even allow the envelopes to be opened until later on election day. Florida is sort of like Virginia in the sense that they allow ballots to be processed, but in Florida they allow ballots to be counted and then the count held until election day. And so Florida had probably the same ratio of early absentee versus election day voting as Virginia did, but Florida's results were pretty quick, in part because they've been doing this for years. So all of that to say, nothing that's happening right now is odd, abnormal, out of the norm. And it probably will be another 24, 38 hours before we actually have final results from, not final projected results from a lot of states. I mean, we're not going to have certified results for another week, probably, from most states. And then I'll just say this. I'm not actually worried about court challenges and a legal fight, in part because I think we all remember, we're all probably old enough on here to remember Florida in 2000. And so we think, oh my gosh, there's going to be another Florida 2000 here. In 2000, in the 2000 election in Florida, what the Supreme Court did was it said, you have to follow the state's laws. What was happening is that ballots were being contested, and there had been a recounting, two recounts of ballots in Florida in particular counties. And because of the whole hanging Chad controversy, the Democrats were saying, we want to do another count because we want to do another check on those hanging Chads. And Republicans challenged that. And Florida election officials were going to allow it. Republicans challenged it. The Supreme Court said, you've got to follow election law in Florida. And it says after 2 rounds, the final count is the final count. So I'm not worried about the court possibility this time, because I do, regardless of what the ideological makeup of the Supreme Court is because the Supreme Court has essentially, in the 3 cases that it's looked at so far, or that have risen to it so far, they've been consistent with what they did in 2000 in Florida. They basically said, you got to follow state law. And so I don't anticipate it becoming a controversy that rises to the Supreme Court, but I also don't anticipate it being a controversy if it gets to the Supreme Court, because I think they're going to do the same thing they did in 2000, which is to say whatever state law is what you have to follow. So at the end of the day, whoever ends up winning, and clearly it looks like Biden, has the advantage here in terms of his ability to get to 270 or beyond. He has more of an advantage or more of an opportunity than Trump does. Whoever ends up winning, I think it's at the end of the day going to be a pretty clean win, even if it's close. And look, we're a closely divided country, but I think it's going to be a pretty clean win. Let me just talk about Virginia really quickly. I just have to, I know there's a lot of state and local officials. Well, actually, there probably aren't a lot of, I see Councilman Rouse, but there probably aren't a lot of state local officials. But I think our local elected election officials really should deserve a shout out, because we went in Virginia from having massively restrictive rules about how you could vote early absentee. You had to qualify. There were narrow exceptions that related to health and your ability to physically be in the state on election day. We went from that to essentially unrestricted early absentee and in-person voting. And I don't know of a controversy that has happened in Virginia. There was an incident in Henrico County where a thumb drive was mislabeled. And so initially the Henrico, that 21,000 votes weren't counted it was mislabeled as provisional ballots when it was really just early absentee ballots. And so initially, provisional ballots aren't counted; they have to be provisionally certified. But that was a simple mislabeling error. It was caught. Those votes were brought in. Spotsylvania County had a little bit of a delay in getting some of their provisional ballots counted. It was a human power problem. It wasn't a mistake or on anybody's part. Beyond that, Virginia election officials performed wonderfully, I think, given that more votes were cast early in person or by mail this year than in person on election day. So I think our election officials deserve a shout out. And then I'll just say this thing about one last thing about elections in Virginia. It's been over a decade since Republicans won a statewide race in Virginia. 2009, Bob McDonnell ran in the shadow of Barack Obama's 2008 win. There was sort of a backlash, political backlash, but Bob McDonnell also ran a very adroit campaign that focused on jobs and the economy. That's the last time Republicans have won statewide. And if I were a Republican election official, or if I were sort of a Republican strategist, I would be really anxious about the results on Tuesday, because it's been almost over 40 years since a Democrat won Lynchburg, a Democratic presidential candidate won Lynchburg. Joe Biden carried Lynchburg, the city of Liberty University. Joe Biden carried Chesterfield County. Joe Biden's margins in Virginia Beach were bigger than a Democratic presidential candidate in a long time. It says to me that that Republicans, if Republicans are losing what I would call the sort of outer suburbs or the lesser suburban areas, Lynchburg isn't a big city, but it has some sort of characteristics of a suburban area. Chesterfield, if you're familiar with Chesterfield County, the northern part of Chesterfield County up against Richmond is more suburban, but you get really rural areas of Chesterfield County, and the southwestern part of Chesterfield County might as well be Southwest Virginia. If Democrats are doing well in places like that and Republicans are struggling in places like that, I think Republicans really have some soul searching to do and sort of rethinking about how they speak to not just urban voters and not just inner suburban voters, but outer suburban voters, ex-urban voters in Virginia as we go forward. And I'm thinking about a potential Republican inter-party fight between Amanda Chase and Kirk Cox. Those are two different views of Republican politics. And in the past decade, the Amanda Chase view has won out over the Kirk Cox view. And I think that's why Republicans are finding themselves where they are. And so, this was a presidential election year. It wasn't a state election year statewide, but I think the results of Tuesday do have implications for the gubernatorial race next year, and the attorney general and lieutenant governor's race, obviously next year. So, and I'm glad to talk any more about that as we go. Let me just say a few words about, I think, what I should be talking about, the Dillon Rule and Hampton Roads. So I know that Andrew McClellan mentioned or sort of brought up the Dillon Rule to a certain extent. I'll just sort of very briefly say the Dillon Rule we call it Dillon Rule. It's and there's a little bit of political science research on it, but it essentially goes back to an 1800s court case, and I'll just briefly say it's about this: when the railroads were spreading across the country from east to west, they got to I believe it was Cedar Rapids, Iowa, if I remember right, and the city of Cedar Rapids said, we don't want you to build a railroad through our town. We don't want to divide the town like that. So you got to go around. We're not going to issue a permit for you to build the railroad. And railroad officials said, well, wait a minute. The state said we could do this. The city is saying we can't do this. We're stuck. We don't want to build the railroad around town. We want the railroad to be straight, And so it ended up in court, and the Iowa Supreme Court essentially issued a ruling and the Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court was a guy named John Dillon, and he wrote the majority opinion, and he articulated a legal concept in this opinion that said, you know, the supremacy of the state governs here, that the city of Cedar Rapids is simply a subdivision of the state. Any authority that the city of Cedar Rapids has essentially derives from the state. And so if the higher authority says you can do it, the lesser authority doesn't have any right to stop it. And so it became known as Dillon's rule, or the Dillon rule. And it was affirmed by a couple of Supreme Court cases later on, one that involved the conflict between New York and New Jersey. So it's been affirmed. And so since I think that was in the 1870s. So since the 1870s, we have begun to think about how states manage themselves and how localities manage themselves. And so we've gotten to where we classify states as Dillon rule states, or the opposite of a Dillon rule state would be called a home rule state. And we've always called Virginia a Dillon rule state. And I'll make two arguments. One is the reason that Virginia looks like such a Dillon rule state has something to do with something else that's unique to Virginia, and that the Virginia isn't actually as Dillon rule oriented as we like to say it is. But what is the opposite of a Dillon rule state? The opposite of a Dillon rule state would be something like Michigan or California, where school districts, for example, in California and Michigan have taxing authority. And this is true in a lot of other states, Oklahoma, places like that. School districts' budgets are built on property taxes, and school districts, school boards set property tax rates in many places, and that's how they fund the school system. And so you have that level of individual, that level of local autonomy, such that a school district would set a property tax rate to build its budgets to fund its schools, and they've got such a history of doing this that they operate essentially independently. Occasionally, a school district will collapse on itself, and the state will have to take over. So Los Angeles County Schools, for example, about a decade ago, found themselves in such trouble that they essentially gave themselves their authority over to the state of California. And the state of California then hired the former governor of Colorado to come in and run the Los Angeles County school system, which tells you something about how big that school system is for them to go looking for somebody at the level of a former governor to come and run it. And the thing that broke the back of the Los Angeles County school system is they had spent about $1 billion building a new high school, only to discover that it had been built on a hazardous waste site and nobody could actually use it. And so it became a big controversy, but it was a big deal for the school system to essentially lose its autonomy to the state. There have been other cases like that. All that I'm describing right now is sort of alien language to us in Virginia because our school systems don't have anywhere near that kind of autonomy and authority. If you think about things that our schools systems, our school divisions are struggling with right now in Hampton Roads and around Virginia. You know, in Newport News, where I live, the school board struggles with the city council to get enough money to renovate schools and think about building, you know, replacement schools like Huntington Middle School. And why do they do that? Because the school board has no independent authority to raise any money. They have to get an allocation from the city council. They get an allocation from the state. They know what they're going to get from the federal government based upon formulas. They have no independent authority, and so I think the school systems are stuck in a position where they have all the responsibility and almost none of the authority to independently carry out those responsibilities. That is a function of Dillon rule and the way we practice it in Virginia. and here's why we practice it like that in Virginia. And I think it has a little bit to do with our political culture, and has a little bit to do with our something else. We're the only state in the country that has independent cities and counties. So in Virginia, a city is not a subdivision of a county. So in any other state, except Louisiana, where they would call them parishes, in any other state, a city would be a subunit of a county. So in North Carolina, Charlotte is a subunit of Mecklenburg County. In Detroit is a subunit of Wayne County. Los Angeles is a subunit of Los Angeles County. Las Vegas is a subunit of Clark County. In Virginia, Norfolk is an independent city. Virginia Beach is an independent city. Manassas is an independent city. They're not part of counties. And so part of the reason, so if you take that understanding and set it aside for a moment, and then think about the political culture of Virginia. Virginia has what political scientists describe as a very traditionalistic political culture. And this is a common political culture to the South, the lower Midwest, the mid-Atlantic, sort of where we are. And it's a middle ground between two other political cultures that are dominant in the United States, an individualistic political culture and a moralistic political culture. So out West, you get a very individualistic political culture, sort of libertarianism, taken beyond the political meaning of it. People, have been used to going out and sort of carving out their own lives and identities out in the wild, untamed West, for example, a very individualistic culture. In the New England and upper Midwest, you have a very moralistic political culture where people feel responsible to care for each other and that translates to governments having a bigger role. In the South, there's been a much more traditionalistic political culture that literally derives out of the plantation aristocracy political culture. It's very ambivalent toward individuals having any sort of power beyond that which the elites in society are going to grant them. Governments exist essentially to maintain the social and economic hierarchy that is in place in the South, essentially in this part of the country. Politicians typically historically have come from the social and economic elite, not from the grassroots. Politicians have historically had sort of a family hierarchy and sort of a family obligation to sort of play a role. Ordinary citizens are told where and when to participate, and when they're not, they're sort of kept at arm's length. The bureaucracy is generally viewed with suspicion. It essentially derives from the history of the South and the way the South always functioned. So when you overlay separate cities and counties and a very traditionalistic political culture, what you get is, I think, akin to what we have right now in terms of how our cities and counties and the state functions. And we often blame it on Dillon's rule, but I don't think Dillon's rule actually is responsible. As an aside, just sort of an asterisk, the reason this redistricting reform amendment that passed on Tuesday is such a big deal in my mind is it literally chips away at that traditionalistic political culture in a fundamental way that I, quite frankly, don't know that I would have believed would have happened even 3 or 4 years ago. Virginia is the first Southern state that I'm aware of to give such enormous authority and power over to a commission that will include individuals. It really does represent kind of a revolutionary change in my mind in the sort of political culture of Virginia and how it's going to translate into power going forward is going to be a fascinating question to me. But so if you look at Virginia law, back to Dillon rule, if you look at Virginia law actually encourages more local autonomy, more regional collaboration, and gives local governments more authority than I think local governments often want or feel like they can use. And the reason I think local governments often feel like they can't use it or aren't in the habit of using it is because of this traditionalistic political culture and the separate cities and counties. So, for example, just to come really close to home here, or at home, is there really any reason that Norfolk and Virginia Beach and Chesapeake couldn't work closer together and do things better together? Legally, no. There's nothing in Virginia law that would stop greater collaboration and coordination. There's a lot of history that links to that traditionalistic political culture that stops it, but there's nothing in the law that stops it. Structurally, however, it also is difficult because, think about when Norfolk, if you go back to the 1950s, when white flight started happening, when Brown v. Board happened and white flight started happening, white residents leaving the cities because they didn't want their kids to have to go to school with black kids. How did Charlotte deal with that? The way Charlotte dealt with that, what happens when white flight started happening is, your wealthier citizens started leaving, your tax base started getting eroded. So Charlotte dealt with that by annexing, right? So, people would move out to a newly developed subdivision right outside of the city limits, but in Mecklenburg County. Charlotte eventually would annex that new subdivision. And when Charlotte annexed part of Mecklenburg County, it wasn't a zero-sum game because Charlotte was a part of Mecklenburg County. It wasn't like Mecklenburg County was losing a lot. Charlotte was a part of Mecklenburg County. So it was just an incorporated area within the county becoming a little bit larger. But when white flight started happening in Norfolk, and Norfolk started annexing Princess Anne County to recapture some of that tax base, that was a zero-sum game. Whatever Norfolk gained, Princess Anne County lost. And then it became a big fight. And so that's the kind of stuff where our separate cities and counties, not having cities a part of counties, but having cities as separate from counties, makes coordination and cooperation more difficult and exacerbates what we often try to blame on the Dillon rule. We can't do something because Richmond won't let us. Well, we got to go to Richmond to get permission for that, or the legislature is not going to allow that, so we're not even going to try to do that. The reality is it's difficult to do, in part because we're not the same. We're not a city and a county, we're a separate city and county. And our political culture, the traditionalistic political culture, wants us to lean on authority and say, well, we got to get permission. We got to go up to Richmond and talk to the people in charge. And so I am not a fan of blaming Dillon rule for a lot of things. I think Dillon rule actually gets blamed for things that it's not always responsible for. And I think we somehow have to learn how. We know we have separate cities and counties. I mean, we understand that that's the way Virginia is structured. It's never going to change. We're not going to change Virginia like in that. So I think our challenge is to learn how to work in the context of having cities and counties that are right next to each other and equally powerful in the sense of the authorities that they have, and stop blaming Dillon rule for things. And I actually think, it isn't going to change anytime soon, but we're moving away from a more traditionalistic political culture to something akin to a more moralistic political culture, which is something that looks more like, Middle Atlantic, New England up in that context. And that also relates to the bluing of Virginia. It just so happens that traditionalistic political cultures are more red, moralistic political cultures are more blue. Individualistic political cultures out west can take on the form of blue or red, depending on the state they're in. So I'm mindful of the time. I'll stop there and we can chat back and forth. the only thing I do like about Zoom is I don't have to dodge tomatoes. So I'll stop there and then we can go.
No, Quentin, you are honestly, I mean, this is always fascinating to me. And I don't know. So by a show of hands, and you can literally just raise your hand, how many people were aware of I'm sure you were all aware of the Dillon rule, but how many people were aware that it's blamed more often and not necessarily the thing that is stopping progress? Okay. All right. That's pretty good. So I know we do have some questions, Quentin, and so it's okay to ask questions, whether it is about what we've just talked about with the Dillon rule, which we do feel like is a baseline for everybody to kind of get an understanding of. Quentin, the good news is we are seeing more collaboration in our region, and we're really proud.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting times. Things are moving forward. So I'm going to start. The very first question actually came in from Aaron Rouse. Aaron, can you unmute yourself? And the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Quentin. That was,
Yes.
I'm like Sarah, that was very interesting and fascinating here. I won't take too long because I'm sure I don't want to bore my classmates. My question is really from a holistic view. When you look at the country and you see how different states are going either red or blue, and I'm sure there'll be different perspectives on the numbers, but what is your take on really the values America are seeing, the value America is saying what's important?
So I tend to see the political struggle. So I always think of America as sort of an experiment, a continuous experiment, and the experiment is about how we bring to life the values that were laid out in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I think that's ultimately our struggle. And I think so I see it through that lens in part. And I also see it in part through the lens of a reoccurring struggle that America has always had. If you go back and look through the history of this country, there have been times like what we're living through right now. Donald Trump is Donald Trump, but Donald Trump if you put him aside, the things that we're struggling with right now, this sort of jingoistic kind of America first, close our doors to the rest of the world, revert back to the sort of some of the worst tendencies in our history. That has happened in the past. It typically has been around issues of incorporating people into or bringing people into the political process that were previously excluded. Whether it was initially it was property owning white men, so whether it was all men, and then whether it was some women who inherited property, that where some states started allowing women to inherit property, whether it was freed slaves and the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, whether it was women in 1919 going forward, or whether it was Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s, whether it was Mexican immigrants in the 1920s, or I think what we're living through right now is the country coming to grips with the change in our 1965 immigration laws, where we essentially, in 1965, we changed our immigration laws, and we essentially said, all right, we're going to allow people to immigrate to the United States from any country in the world. But what we're going to do is we're going to cap immigration from any country in the world at 20,000 people. Previously, we had said, our immigration laws had said, if you come from Europe, and in particular Northern Europe, anybody can come. But we literally banned immigration from Africa and Asia and other parts of the world. We changed that in 1965. So we have been seeing now the first full generation of people born of immigrants who came since 1965 expressing their political muscle. And I think the country is coming to grips with the idea that, the 1965 immigration laws will literally change the face of the country. I think that's part of what's the underlying current that is driving a lot of our reactionary politics right now. And that also happens to coincide with generational changes. I also see what we're going through right now is a fight between the baby boomer generation, who wants they want their Social Security, they want their retirement, they've worked hard for all this stuff, they want their health care, and they don't want to pay a lot of taxes because, quite frankly, if they have to pay more taxes, it makes their financial situation more difficult. And the millennial generation, joined by Gen Z, who is essentially saying, we don't want to have to pay so much for college. We don't want to have all the debt that we have coming out of college. We want to be able to buy a house. We care about, whether we're going to have a stable job or not. We're economically struggling because their generation came of age as the 2008 financial crisis happened. And so I see part of what we're struggling with is a generational fight. Oddly, I say oddly, sadly enough, my generation is sort of caught in the middle, Gen X. I don't know that, I think part of us takes the baby boomer side, part of us takes the millennial side. But I also see this as a generational struggle. And I'm always a glass more than half full person. I don't think, the country is doomed at all. I think this is a growing pain. If any of you have teenage kids, or if you're going to have teenage kids, you'll learn that, the teenage years can be really rough, and you think, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? And then at some point they come right out of that teenage years and they're perfectly wonderful young adults, and you think, I thought it was all going wrong. And then look at it. I think we as a country, we sort of go through the teenage years every 40 or 50 years. But it's a part of growth. And I think we're going to look back on this 10, 15, 20 years from now. And there may be scars. We may have to be paying for some of this. Like, we may have damaged our reputation in certain parts of the world in terms of certain policies. But we'll have, I think, a more diverse a population that is engaged in decision making, that is more diverse and looks like the country, and people that feel more part of that country. And so I tend to see the struggles that we're going through right now in more positive ways, even if when you're in the midst of them, you really struggle. Let me just say one more thing. Donald Trump, when, people always say this is the most important election of your lifetime, and 99.9% of the time you can totally dismiss that because everybody running for office says that. I do think this presidential election was, however, one of the most important of our lifetimes, if not the most important, because Donald Trump's America First worldview did represent and does represent a dramatic change from the approach America has taken to itself and the world since 1932. When FDR ran for president in 1932 and he offered a New Deal, what was the New Deal? The New Deal was a New Deal from the Revolution of 1800. When Thomas Jefferson won the presidency in 1800, his argument was states should be where the power is. The federal government should be weak and not really that involved. That was the dominant way America saw its relationship with the federal government from 1800 to 1932, when FDR came along and said, hey, I've got a new deal. The new deal will be a more empowered and engaged federal government and an America more involved in the world. And so we took that new deal in 1932, and that has been our approach to the world and ourselves since then. Donald Trump says, I've actually got a new deal also. The new deal is, let's pull ourselves back from the world. Let's shrink the size of the federal government. Let's push authority down to states and local governments, and go back to an approach to America that we used to have. And so I do think that this election was the most important election in terms of where we want to be as a country since 1932. And there was one other time between 1932 and 2020 where what Trump is running on was advocated, and that was in 1952 when Ohio Senator Bob Taft ran against Dwight Eisenhower in the 1952 Republican nomination contest. And Bob Taft was essentially arguing for an America First return to a pre-1932 America. and he lost to Eisenhower in the 1952 Republican convention. Eisenhower ends up winning the White House. But that's so since 1952, nobody on the Republican side has come close to advocating what Trump as a president advocated for, except perhaps Pat Buchanan, but nobody, I don't think, ever thought Pat Buchanan had a serious chance. So that's a long-winded answer to.
No, it's fine. And I just want to say, couldn't you say up to World War II, because before World War II, the United States basically didn't want to get involved in another war, but Pearl Harbor happens, the Japanese brings us into a world war, and there goes America's foreign policy, so to speak, and then isolationism basically also going out the window.
Yeah, no, that's fair. You're right. I think it did occur in stages. I think the New Deal was really a domestic approach, like a larger, more engaged federal government domestically, and then the war pulled that New Deal into an international frame that we've not come out of.
Right.
Even if we are arguing about it right now, I don't think we've actually stepped out of the international frame at this point. But I think that's right. Yeah.
Aaron, thank you for that excellent question. And Quentin, thank you for the excellent answer. My goodness, you are absolutely amazing. I don't think there's a question we can throw at you that you don't know the answer to. I think it's brilliant. Charles Mixer is up next. Charles, are you able to unmute yourself now?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. And Quentin, thanks for doing this. Scrolling through my Facebook feed, and people are like commenting and freaking out because they say they voted early, but then they're checking online to see, if it's been recorded. But people are saying that that it's like they didn't vote. So, I'm just reading through the comments. People are freaking out. Some people give some reasoning, and I really don't know the answer because it's hard to say because so many people have their own opinions. But I'm just curious, with early voting and people checking online to see, they want to see their results. Like, is there some kind of delay, or what is going on? Why are people freaking out?
So I don't know any particular, any given person's answer. I will say that there is a delay. So for example, and I don't know what the delay is in any given locality, but here's a sense of the delay. Local governments, local voter registrars were counted same day votes first, and then they shifted to counting early votes, and they all agreed. The State Board of Elections sort of encouraged all local voter registrars to kind of stop at 11 o'clock, send their people home, and then they were going to come back the next morning, Wednesday morning, and continue the count. And what they were going to do, what they agreed to do, was at 11 o'clock when they stopped, they were going to then report whatever they had counted. So if you were up, if you happen to be a junkie and you stayed up late enough to watch this, it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning before we started seeing the vote count shift that reflected those early votes that had been processed after the polls closed at 7 o'clock. That was probably a 3 or 4 or 5 hour delay in the data being uploaded and it being reflected on databases that people had access to. So there is a delay in the system, in the process, but I don't know in any individual ballot whether any individual ballot, what the story is. I followed the saga of my good friend Vivian Page, who tried to track her ballot over several weeks, and she was struggling to find her ballot. Like, she couldn't find it being recorded, and so I know that happened. There are not many instances of votes being not counted and ballots being totally lost that I know of. However, I have a friend who is they're in the military. They live in Virginia. They're from Pennsylvania. They were going to do the early voting like military people could, and they ended up not being able to find their ballot. on the Pennsylvania system. And so they literally drove to Pennsylvania on Tuesday to vote because they wanted to make sure they were able to vote. So I know that stuff happens. I think it's rare. And I think usually it's a delay in the system processing and us being able to see what the system is processing.
That was a great question, Charles. Thank you for that. We have Glenn on now Glenn, are you able to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Quentin, I'm going to dial it back a little bit. I love the global politics and we're all, been tuned in, but back to regionalism and you mentioned the, at some point in time in Hampton Roads where, Suffolk and Nansemond County came together and formed the largest city in Virginia and those type of things. I'm a Richmond native, so I grew up in Chesterfield County. Was the result of annexation from the city when I was young, and my parents did what most they did. We moved deeper into the county. Now I'm a city resident, but what I see, the point of the question is, how do you make that one? How did it happen? I understand. I see the benefits from looking at both regions. I think the regionalism and what Norfolk can do is, or Virginia Beach can do is much more functional than what Richmond can do, especially since half of Richmond's owned by the state. They don't pay taxes, so it's very difficult for the city to function in the way it does. But what would be the opportunity of Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond ever coming together in the way Hampton Roads did? And is that just pie in the sky?
So the reason that Richmond doesn't have, the Richmond metro area doesn't have the city of Henrico and the city of Hanover and the city of Chesterfield like we have the city of Virginia Beach, the city of Suffolk, and the city of Chesapeake, which are functionally big counties that became cities to block Norfolk from annexing them, is because Hampton Roads went through what was called the consolidation and annexation era of our politics before Richmond did. So we started going through consolidation and we started fighting regionally, put it that way, before Richmond did. And so then by the time it became a big controversy in Hampton Roads, or back then Tidewater, the General Assembly essentially passed some laws that stopped annexation and consolidation. And so Chesterfield, Henrico, and Hanover didn't have to become cities because the General Assembly had essentially stopped Richmond from annexing and forcing Hanover, Chesterfield, and Henrico from becoming cities, because a city can't annex another city. The city can only annex a county. And so the reason Princess Anne County became the city of Virginia Beach is because that was how you could stop Norfolk from continuing to annex into Princess Anne County. And the annexation that caused all the problems of the controversy that caused the Kellum family to work with the city of Virginia Beach and sort of create the city of Virginia Beach was the annexation of the Norfolk military circle area. When Norfolk annexed military circle area, that apparently was a step too far for the Princess Anne County elite. And they secretly started negotiating with the little resort strip of Virginia Beach to say, look, let's become a city so we can stop Norfolk from annexing us. And that sort of created a crescendo of others. But what was happening at the same time on the peninsula, where I am in Newport News, and a lot of this was race. I mean, a lot of what motivated this was racial politics at the time. In Newport News, which used to be just a little city at the bottom of the peninsula where the shipyard is and the Southeast community is, the population in Newport News started to become majority minority. The white population got small enough in Newport News because everybody was moving out to Warwick County. And so the white elite in Newport News negotiated with the largely white population of Warwick County and said, let's merge and become a big city of Newport News, because it made the racial balance of that new city more white. And so this was happening all over the place, but it was happening in Tidewater earlier than it started happening in the Richmond area. And then the General Assembly stepped in and said, we're going to stop all this annexing and consolidating. And that's what literally caused Hanover, Chesapeake, and Henrico not to have to become cities. if the General Assembly hadn't stepped in, Richmond would look just like Hampton Roads does. It would be the city of Richmond surrounded by 3 massive cities called Hanover, Chesterfield, and Henrico. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
Yeah, it's we've long struggled with, if we could just all get on the same page and focus on regional, benefits, but it doesn't.
Well, and again, the separate cities and counties, in my mind, is what makes regionalism difficult, but not impossible. Look, there's a lot of space in Virginia law to allow it. I mean, we can do shared taxing authorities. I realize I'm not involved in the nitty gritties of this, but I've often wondered to myself, why can't, it's clear Virginia Beach wants an arena. It's clear Norfolk would like an arena. Chesapeake would probably like to play a role in arena. Why not a shared taxing authority that encompasses parts of all 3 of those cities, and they agree to build an arena that is big enough to be a pro sports level arena? Nothing is standing in the way of that except us, people. The law is not standing in the way. There's nothing in Virginia law that keeps any of that from happening. But it's difficult because, again, it's a zero-sum game. If Norfolk does something, Virginia Beach doesn't benefit from it as directly as it would want to. Chesapeake doesn't benefit from it directly. If Virginia Beach does something, Norfolk doesn't benefit directly. And so we create these zero-sum games because we have separate cities and counties. And so I think the answer is to go a level above that and say, can we create these shared regional authorities that go around, that go over those lines? Richmond did that with the Coliseum. All 3 counties in the city are involved in the Coliseum. Of course, the Coliseum is old enough now, and there's talk of replacing it. And now it seems like the 3 counties aren't necessarily interested in helping pay to replace it. There's also talk about the Diamond in Richmond and whether the counties are going to be involved in something that replaces the Diamond. And so it happens, but there have to be the right characters, the right personalities involved in the leadership of it to make it happen. And, unfortunately, as Councilman Rouse can attest to, he can expend a lot of political capital trying to get Norfolk to do something, but his voters may not care. And that's part of the dilemma, is that, where you get your political authority isn't always where you want to expend your political capital. And somehow there has to be another mechanism layered over this to allow political capital to be spent without losing your base of voters that might or might not understand why you're spending your political capital like that.
Understood. Awesome. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Glenn. That was a great question. And now we want to make sure that we give you all time for a brief break. Aaron, I know that you had a question. Do you want to hold that question until after, and we can maybe send that to Quentin and get that back to you, or would you like to ask it live?
I'll hold it. Thank you.
You got it. So Quentin, we may have a couple of people that are interested in some literature that you might have. So I'm going to send you an email afterwards. Perhaps you can share with us some books if they wanted to do some more research on some of the topics that you covered today. Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah, and I have a book that I'll recommend to everybody. It was actually a dissertation that was written long ago called Merger Politics, and it tells a story about how Hampton Roads became Hampton Roads in the 50s and 60s.
That is brilliant. Thank you. All right, that's on my book list. Ready to go. Well, thank you so much. This really has been fascinating. In full disclosure, this is my second presidential election. I became a United States citizen, and I have to say this one has definitely been a very different experience. So thank you for joining us.
That is true.
Can we
Take
please
care.
give Quentin a big round of applause? There you go, sir. You've got
Thank you, everybody.
from everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. So in the essence of time, we want to make sure you guys get a little bit of a break on your eyes. So you can just mute yourselves and turn off your cameras. If you can make sure that you are back online by 11 o'clock, we have our next speakers that are ready to rock and roll. And we really appreciate you all being so, obviously patient with us as we do this. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. Our next session is focused on the state of transportation in the region, and we have two experts to lead this conversation today. Bob Crum is the Executive Director for the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission and the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, and Kevin Page is the Executive Director for Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. Bob Crum began his tenure as Executive Director for HRPDC and HRTPO on July the 1st, 2015. Imagine being the person responsible for coordinating cooperation among the region's 17 jurisdictions in areas such as regional consensus building, legislative affairs, and transportation, community, environmental, housing, economic, and emergency management planning. When it comes to collaboration, Bob Crum makes it happen. Kevin Page is Hampton Road Transportation Accountability Commission's first executive director. Like Bob, he arrived into our region in 2015. Since taking on this role, HR TAC has successfully planned for, financed, and advanced to construction $5.2 billion in funded Hampton Roads highway congestion relief projects with VDOT. That set an unprecedented fast pace to break ground within 6 months to deliver its first project by December 2017, followed by the completion of over 200 lane miles of road, bridge, and tunnel congestion relief projects by 2021. We want to remind you that this session is interactive. Please let us know if you have a question by typing the word question in the chat function, and I will call upon you during the Q&A session. Thank you so much, Bob and Kevin. I know you have a lot of work going on, so we really appreciate you being with us today. The virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah Jane. Maybe I'm going to introduce our session, and then Kevin and I are going to tag team this. So to the civic membership and class, thank you for being with us today, for giving Kevin and I a chance to tell you the story of really exciting things that are happening in the Hampton Roads 757 region. As we go through this, just a couple of takeaways that I hope that you'll see from this presentation. And Kevin and I are going to focus on transportation today, but a few things. You know, we work on behalf of 17 local governments in the Hampton Roads region. And I got to be honest, you know, there's this convenient conversation. It gets a little tired that there's no regional cooperation happening in Hampton Roads or the 757 region. The one thing I hope that you'll take from today is that what we're about to present to you today is a model, not only in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but honestly, nationally. Kevin and I get phone calls from metropolitan regions all over the country wondering how Hampton Roads has over $5.3 billion with a B of interstate highway construction underway without a single nickel from the federal government. Okay, this is really regional cooperation at its best, 17 governments collectively coming together to not only plan and come up with an idea, but what Kevin's going to describe is move things to construction more quickly than honestly we've ever seen. Our region has the second largest interstate highway construction program of any metropolitan region in the country, and it's happening today all around us. So we are just incredibly excited about that. So this is the story of HRTAC and the HRTPO, and just the story of our region and how we're really laying the groundwork that we think is going to be transformational for our region. So we're really excited to tell that story today. So I'm going to let Kevin kick this off. Sarah Jane, everybody see my slide okay? Everything's up and running?
You are all
set,
yes,
the
sir.
slides. Kevin's going to take the first part of it. I'm going to fill in the middle, and then Kevin's going to bring us home at the end. So Kevin, let's go ahead and get underway here.
Okay, thanks, Bob, and thank you all very much. You know, Sarah especially, and Amisa and others, for having Bob and me over today to share with you all some of the success story of the not only regional collaboration, but the true absolute evolution, a very quick evolution as to how Hampton Roads is solving its not only its transportation problems, but I think as a region in the last 5 years, we've grown up quite a bit as a region, how we work together. It's no longer the Peninsula and Southampton roads. It's in the realm that Bob and I work in on a daily basis, both day and night, I may say. Those of all of us who are in public enterprise, our work is never done and our day is never over. The 24-hour clock means it just moved over to the next day. It still has the same issues and challenges. Over at HR TAC, where Bob's going to talk about where he is in the planning organization piece of this, because Bob is our federal planning partner. You know, his role, many of the roles, as you described, Sarah, Bob's roles, is Bob runs the TPO, which is our federal planning partner. And through the creation of the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund in 2013, came the next year in 2014, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. Just like there's separation of church and state, there needs to be separation of the federal planning body and also regional transportation planning, and then how we execute those projects. The real game changer as well with that was money, and that's the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund that was created, because the TPO had prioritized these projects for decades, and you know, we were able to at HR TAC come in and develop the financing plan and models. Those of you who are familiar with the acronym VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, we are a mini VDOT for our region. We're also a mini Department of Rail and Public Transportation for our region. And you'll talk, Bob, a little bit about that, and I will as well a little bit later in the presentation about how we're getting into transit now. But right now we're developing financing plans for both our highway program and soon to be our transit program. And then we, HR TAC, actually hire VDOT to be our general contractor. So when you see a VDOT project out there, the 200 lane miles that Sarah talked about that are going to be complete and in service in a few years, those 200 lane miles are under contracts where HR TAC is employing VDOT as our general contractor. So have some pride in the ownership of those projects as you drive around the region, because we're the ones that have lifted that boat in the tidal basin of the Chesapeake. Bob, next slide, please. You know, one of the things I think, again, at our legislative fathers and mothers in Richmond and the state legislature in the creation of the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund is that they put in a stipulation that these fund monies cannot be used just to give to VDOT to maintain current highway problems and conditions. As you know, there's a massive backlog in the aging condition, not only of our local roads and local streets, but our interstate highway system. Now that the Federal Highway Administration, through the Johnson administration, golly boy, that was back a long time ago, created the interstate highway system, they have to renew the interstate highway system. Bridges are falling down, critical infrastructure, and right now the federal and state dollars are diminishing for availability for expansion projects like the ones that we're tackling, but they're also being used to maintain and renew the existing highway system, which had not been anticipated until after FHWA, the acronym for the Federal Highway Administration, had gotten to the point of completing the interstate system and says, wow, now that we're done, what are we going to do? And they looked around after 30 years of development and found that everything that they're building has fallen apart because they didn't maintain it as well as they should have. So the HRTF can be used for roads, bridges, and tunnels expansion projects that have been deemed as the highest congestion relief priority of the region. And part of that separation of powers and collaboration is we rely at HR TAC on the TPO through the practitioners at the TPO and the leadership over there under Bob Crum to move forward to help us with the prioritization of those projects, and then HR TAC moves forward from there. Hey, Bob, next slide, please. Thank you. So what does the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund comprise of? We have an additional sales tax of 0.7% that came to us in 2013. For FY19, that netted out about $140 million in revenues, just below that. And also, we have an additional fuels tax of 2.1%, which has just recently been reconverted to a cents per gallon tax through the state legislature's session this year, 2020, which kicked in July of this year. So no longer is it a percentage sales tax index. It's one that's indexed on a cents per gallon tax. And it also has a CPIU entered into it, so that these percentages, which are now converted to cents per gallon, do not sit. They actually grow with the CPIU, which gives us an opportunity to anticipate additional revenues in the event of inflation on the urban CPIU index. So the other thing I think to point out here is, and again with Civic and everyone out there, this is not just a story about numbers. This is a story about courage and also responsibility. And I think it's very important to emphasize, at least in my role, that I'm always looking out for the region and the commission as we move forward. That's where we did the conversion to cents per gallon. But we also did something called the Wayfair tax. HR TAC and others who are very reliant on that sales and use tax revenue knew that the open big box stores and the mom and pop stores were becoming more and more of say a latent business platform for the millennials and others, because they wanted to get on, surf Amazon at 2 o'clock in the morning and start ordering online. Well, we didn't have the ability or capability to capture that revenue, and thanks to the General Assembly, it imposed in what was referred to as the Wayfair tax, which Amazon was already doing voluntarily. And we now have a sales tax on internet sales, which brings us additional revenues. The value of that was, and that courage to move forward with that, is that when COVID shut down America, i.e. Virginia, Hampton Roads, we actually saw a reduction in our fuels tax revenues, but due to the Wayfair tax, we had a massive increase in our sales and use tax. And if you've been listening to Finance Secretary Lane speaking globally from a state perspective, what you find is that Wayfair tax has been the salvation to us, because it has helped us maintain our revenues also during this time of pandemic. The other part of this I want to comment on very briefly is that Hampton Roads suffers from congestion that the pandemic did not affect. We have aircraft carriers that come in, there's basically a city on the water. We are finding that we are at about 90 to 95%, depending on the day, of our congestion at HRBT at historic congestion levels right now during the pandemic. So we, at best, are 5% below what the highest average was on congestion for HRBT, which still exceeds the maximum capacity of throughput for that tunnel system. That's why you're still seeing those backups today that you saw before the pandemic. That is so uniquely different because we're a captive audience. The only way we can get across the water, I don't care what Waze does, alternate detours, alternate routes, how we take side streets, we always end up on a water crossing like HRBT to get across town. So that has been a very positive point I want to make to you all, is that how we've been able to go into COVID and continue to develop this over $5 billion portfolio of projects because of the fact that we've made some prudent decisions to move forward, finance them during a time when money was cheap. We have a 2.7% construction escalation for our projects in Hampton Roads, and we sold debt in December of last year at 2.6%. So we actually went out and borrowed money cheaper than inflation at the right time for the marketplace. So Bob, next slide.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. There we go.
No, that's okay. There you go. Okay, a graphic kind of tells the story. $5.17 billion of total project value, and $4.64 billion is coming from our region. And that's a staggering amount of money that this region is lifting on this. But I want to be very clear to everyone, these projects would not be moving forward today if it had not been for the courage of the General Assembly to create the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund and HR TAC, and how we've been able to move forward with these projects under this collaborative agreement where, Bob, you can talk to it from your point of view, but we refer to this as a three-legged stool. We have a relationship with the Virginia Department of Transportation, Bob's relationship with us in the TPO and in the support and the prioritization of the projects moving forward, and also through his long-range planning efforts, and then HR TAC in the financing and delivery of those projects, whether it be direct or through our contracts with VDOT. The ability of a three-legged stool, this is leadership, I guess, in motion here in Hampton Roads, is that I've always believed you have to set up agreements so that those agreements are so bound between the partners that if you pull one leg out from under that three-legged stool of those tri-party relationships, it falls apart. And what that does is drives discipline, it drives courage, and it also drives success, because we all know that we cannot warble as we move into these projects, especially during these economic dire times, because we've already have these relationships in place that we know we can drive that success. And I think it's very prudent to talk about that in a pandemic situation where Northern Virginia has pulled $500 million of its projects and put them on hold. And Hampton Roads just approved and broke ground for a $3.8 billion Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project on top of the over $1 billion worth of projects we currently had under construction. So Bob loves to talk about our great success and show the graphics and some photographs of the projects we have underway as a region. And I'll turn it over to Bob to go into that show and tell, because it's a great celebration, because I know all of you all on this webinar today have been touched by HR tax projects that have been prioritized and worked with the TPO. So Bob, I'll turn the floor over to you, and you can run forward from there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So one of the things that Kevin and I faced when we arrived in 2015, all these road projects and tunnel projects have been on our map for 30 years. And suddenly we had money coming into the bank account, right? Extra taxes, extra gas tax, regional sales and use tax. How do you get started? The region had never prioritized the projects. So that was the first thing that we had to deal with back in 2015 and 2016. And what really broke loose was a decision made in October 2016, where our region said, okay, these projects are equally important, but we're going to start to advance them based on project readiness. And by using the project readiness test, we were able to really start moving these projects to construction. So the first project that was completed was the I-64 Peninsula widening. I'm sure everybody in the civic class can recall that you'd be driving west on I-64 and you get to Jefferson Boulevard and you automatically hit the brakes, right? Because you were going from a broad cross section down to 2 lanes. That's no more. We now have the first 2 segments of I-64 widened. We're driving them today. Segments 1 and 2 are complete and take us to Busch Gardens, basically, on a widened Interstate 64. Not only 3 lanes in each direction, but widened shoulders as well. That really has helped mobility through that corridor. You see how far it goes. You see the red bricking up by Busch Gardens. This takes you the whole way up to the Busch Gardens area, and certainly the ride from the south side to Busch Gardens got a whole lot more enjoyable. But that's not it for I-64 Peninsula. We are now well into segment 3. Segment 3 is going to take this widening to just west of Williamsburg. What you see some photographs here of are the Queens Creek trestles that are a big part of that project. The segment 3 is going to be completed in about a year from now, December of 2021. So it's really going to be a great celebration. That's going to widen us all the way to exit 234 west of Williamsburg. Now, we did request a federal grant to do the next 7 miles, but unfortunately last month we learned that that was not successful. So we were not able to secure that federal grant. But nevertheless, we're really excited about the I-64 widening. The whole way, a year from now, will be complete to west of Williamsburg. We have about a 25-mile gap to get to Richmond. I'm going to talk about that a little later at the end. A good portion of that, 90% of it, is outside of our region. Kevin cannot spend regional tax dollars from Hampton Roads on that project. So we're really going to need state, federal partners, and even some help from Richmond to continue to push and get that gap, as we call it, between the 757 and the RVA completed. So 64 Peninsula was our first success story. Let's jump to the south side. You all know, the interesting thing about transportation, we're all experts because we all drive it, right? But obviously the high-rise bridge, big choke point. What you see under construction now, this is a photo from just a few weeks ago, is the high-rise bridge and I-64 South Side widening project. So what's going to happen when Kevin and I got to town, this project was estimated at a cost of $2.3 billion. We just couldn't move it. You know, there wasn't enough money there. So through some real collaboration, Kevin, great thinker about how you right-size projects, working with VDOT, we came up with this idea of leaving the existing bridge in place. And you see that on the right-hand side of this photo now. The new bridge is being built to the left and will be elevated at a higher level. Don't know, I think everybody knows this, but when you go over the high-rise bridge, you'll notice it's a drawbridge. It only goes up 2 times a month. But so what you're seeing here is a new bridge constructed about 20 to 30 feet higher than the existing bridge. And what that's going to do during peak hour, it's going to give you 4 lanes in each direction over the high-rise bridge during the peak travel time, the rush hour time. But in addition to that, you're also going to get a widening of I-64 from Bowers Hill the whole way to Greenbrier, where our offices are here. So we're really, really excited about that road widening project. Here's just some, you see a lot of that construction going on. A lot of focus on the high-rise bridge is going to be critically important, but the improvement of mobility on the entire I-64 South Side is really exciting. And we're looking at a spring 2022 completion for that project. So another project that we are just incredibly excited about. It looks like this configuration is going to handle traffic pretty well to the year about 2040. So we're really, really excited about this effort. Then we
Hey, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Bob, before you leave, I just want to make a comment to everyone at Civic about High Rise Bridge. Is that, as you notice, there is a distinct choreography in the way that we have established these projects and their completion on construction schedule. High Rise Bridge will be an 8-lane facility during peak with a median shoulder that's set up for future use. And the reason why we're completing that project in the 2021-2022 timeframe is that we want to have an alternate route that has maximum capacity in case something catastrophically happens at the North Trestle cut-in of the HRBT project. Because as we talk about HRBT and you learn more about it, the North Trestles will become an 8-lane facility. There'll have to be a temporary bridge put in place. And if there's something catastrophic there that should occur, we have an alternate route through Monitor Merrimack Memorial Bridge Tunnel so that we can still provide that great service of transportation to Southampton Roads from the peninsula. So sorry, Bob, I just wanted to point that out to you all so you can kind of, in your minds, as you piece all these projects together, there is a deliberate choreography as to the delivery of these projects, other than the fact that it's just we started building them at a certain time.
Yeah, what a great point, Kevin. You're exactly right. And you know, and that's been, you know, while we wanted to sprint and get started, we really need to be strategic. And Kevin, that's such a critical point. I think, you know, I'm just stating the obvious. I'm sure through Civic, you've learned about our port, or you will. You've learned about our military assets, or you will. No, I know Sarah Jane puts together a great program. We just can't shut down, right? We've got to keep going, even through construction. So Kevin, such a great point. So let's move down the corridor then. Another project we're really excited about is the 264-64 interchange. And certainly if for Virginia Beach and our tourism center at the ocean front, all my friends and neighbors and family from Pennsylvania, this is where they got to go through to get to Virginia Beach, right? Some of them have learned the short drive shortcut, but most of them by and large come through the 264-64 interchange. So Phase 1, which results in improved access if you're coming into the 264-64 interchange from the Indian River Road. You see the improvements on the left there that have already been made. So segment 1 is complete, but the real benefit is going to be the widening that's going to occur the whole way to Wichita as part of this project. And with that also, and as you drive out there now, you'll see this just by the Top Golf, there's going to be what we call the Greenwich Road flyover, which is going to help move traffic over 264, move you over closer to Virginia Beach Boulevard, and give you a different route to get into Virginia Beach Town Center, which we're hoping will start to release some of that terrible congestion down at the Independence interchange. As I said, this widening is going to go the whole way to Witch Duck Road and really ought to improve mobility through that key critical intersection for our region. And then last but certainly not least, the largest project in the history of Virginia. Kevin and I just participated in a groundbreaking for this with Governor Northam just a week ago, but the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project. A project that just has laid in wait for way too long, and we finally, through HR TAC, have the money to move it. Again, this is the largest roadway project in the history of Virginia, approaching $3.8 billion. And 92% of this money to 94% are your local regional tax dollars at work, something we're really proud of. When the construction is complete in 2025, you're going to get 4 lanes underwater in each direction, 4 lanes underwater in each direction. You'll also get improvements in widening that are going to start at Settlers Landing on the peninsula, come down through the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and continue the whole way to the 564 intersection on the south side. So really, this is a generational project and really one we're proud and happy to be part of. We've been on an interesting journey. I like including these pictures of our of Kevin, some of your newer employees out there, right? You and VDOT.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, these for those of you who heard about the birds, the migratory birds, it was you know, was a big game changer. As we relocated all the birds onto those platform barges you see up there on the up there by Fort Wool. They hired these dogs to come in, and what you see down there, those concentric circles that are all joined together, that is going to actually be a silo pit that will run down over 100+ feet. And they're going to drop the boring machine into that. So as you go through HRBT and you see these cranes out there, what they're doing is they're building the slurry walls that will go straight down. Sarah and Amissa, I sent you guys a link to YouTube. You know, if y'all could share the screen and play that less than 2-minute video for everyone so they can kind of see the magnitude of the project, but also see the outcome. I don't know whether it's too late for you to share that, but if you have a few minutes, it's really worth the watch. It's a great presentation and one that just puts some real visual into words.
So yeah, Amasa, why don't I stop share for you?
Yep,
okay.
I can go ahead and share that now, Kevin, if you'd like. I just watched.
Yeah, sure. If you can run it, hopefully it'll work. Everybody pay attention. It's a sweeping screen showing the current project and then what it will look like. It's a split screen. If you've never seen one, it's a really innovative way that we've been using to communicate this project.
The I-64 corridor is one of the most congested areas in all of Virginia, with backups often exceeding 6 miles during peak traffic hours. The Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion.
This is Mallory Street going into HRBT.
Project in Virginia's history is being developed to improve traffic flow and support future growth.
As you can see, this is called the North Trestle Project. The 2 bridges today will be taken down. That's the new bridge on the left serving the westbound lanes, new bridge on the right serving the eastbound lanes. As you see again, the old tunnel approaches and new tunnel approaches will become an 8-lane bridge to Willoughby on a new alignment.
Kevin, if I may, you know, a lot of people think of this project. Kevin, we all think of the bridge tunnel, but now as we go past Willoughby Fit, what's important to see now is this widening goes the whole way to 564 now, which really, really ought to be an enhancement of mobility on the south side. So that's what's important to understand, how far this goes, the whole way to 564.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Not only is it the water crossing itself, we have 26 bridges that go over, feeder streams and tidal basin protected areas, in addition to obviously the city streets in Norfolk. It is a massive project. This is the largest single project that has been undertaken in the history of the Commonwealth, and one we're very proud as a region. Bob and I just can't get over ourselves to be a part of this in celebration of how a region has come together in a very uncertain time and a lack of federal and state funding to actually help the citizens and our visitors as they come in. As you see, those two center lanes are actually part of the HOV HOT network, and this is at 564, which ends our project. So thank you to Sarah and Amesa for sharing that. I think it's a very important piece. Bob, you need to share your screen back if you can. We'll finish up a few minor things and then go to Q&A.
This was a great video. Thank you for letting us do that right there. Then make sure, everybody, that this is uploaded to Basecamp, so you can go in and take a look at it separately after the session. But thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
So let's
go ahead, Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's go through a couple more things here very quickly. So the one thing that I wanted to talk to a little bit about to your membership, Sarah Jane, is this concept of managed lanes. And you'll hear a lot about this, and there's a lot of questions about that. And I just wanted to make certain we provided your class some background information. As we look at, and what we've learned through all of these projects is we look to the future. We're making critical progress here, but we can't be stagnant. We got to be thinking about what's next. And here's some things we know. There's going to be very limited right of way to do future road widening projects. And I'm going to be completely honest. It took a lot of work to fit the HRBT project through the peninsula in the city of Hampton. We have the Emancipation Oak, an incredible resource that we absolutely need to protect. We have the federally designated cemetery on the other side. You just can't keep widening that roadway. You come across the south side, you have the military base, Naval Station Norfolk. Right away is incredibly limited. We also have limited and state federal funding. And I'd just like to put something in perspective for you. Last year, our federal government released their application round for highway construction money. They had $850 million with an M available nationwide, 850 million for every state in our country to all compete for. Your region has over 5 billion under construction. That just puts the magnitude of how much money is at play here. We're not going to be able to go back to state and federal and ask, there's just not a lot of money there. And we really need to maximize the investments that Kevin's talked with you about. So what we're looking at doing is connecting all of these regional priority projects with a managed lane approach that ensures the most throughput at the most reasonable cost for our residents. So a couple of things. Take a look at this real quick. At the bottom of the bar, 2018, 2040, this is what we think is going to happen with vehicle miles traveled between now and 20 years from now. We think it's going to go up about 20%. Can you imagine 20% more traffic through the HRBT right now? That's hard to imagine, right? So what are managed lanes? There's typically two types of managed lanes. One that was tried in the region for a while that really didn't work is on the left. Those are HOV lanes, or high occupancy vehicle lanes. So if I'm driving down the road and I want to move over into an HOV lane, I can't do it if it's just me. I can only do it if it's me and Kevin, we're over there, right? We can use it. There's got to be two or more in the car with me to ride them for free. What we're going to be implementing is a high occupancy toll lane, or a HOT 2. So here's what's important about that. If it's me and another person or more in the vehicle, I can move over and ride for free. But if it's just me in a car and I don't mind paying a modest toll, I can still go over, use my transponder and ride that. I gotta tell you, the HOT lanes on the south side, they're moving about 18% of the traffic from the free general purpose lanes over to the HOT lanes. When I'm here in Greenbrier and I have a meeting on the peninsula, it's the best 50 to 70 cents I'll pay that day. I move over with my Easy Pass and I'm selling, right? We're going to interconnect these regional priority projects with this managed lane approach. And by doing that, here's what we can do. So what we wanted to do is we got our modelers involved and we said, okay, what happens if we build all 3 lanes from Jefferson the whole way down through HRBT, the whole way down through High-Rise Bridge, and take it the whole way out to Bowers Hill? What's going to happen versus hot lanes? And what we found is what other metropolitan areas have learned, you just can't build your way out of congestion, right? And if we made all those lanes free, the trip from 564 on the south side to Settlers Landing, which is 9 miles, would take about 28 minutes. You'd go about 20 miles per hour. But if we provide a hot lane option, we think that we're going to be able to provide a very dependable trip, and you're going to be able to go from 564 up to Settlers Landing. Keep in mind, it's going through the HRBT in no more than 12 minutes, right? We can guarantee you a 45-mile-an-hour trip. So we really think this offers great potential. What we want to do is we want to maximize the pavement we're building. We've got to push as much traffic through as possible. And the philosophy we're going to use on this is not revenue generation, it's vehicle throughput. That's really, really what we're after with this. So just a few other things, Sarah, Jane, that I wanted to mention to your group. I mentioned earlier the I-64 gap, connecting the 757 to the RVA. About 29 miles from where Kevin has stopped the construction to getting to Richmond, 20 miles of that's outside our region, can't be our local regional money. I got to be honest, our friends in Richmond have other priorities for more congested areas. We're really going to have to work with them, our state and federal partners. We're really going to need a collaborative effort to get federal and state dollars invested in that gap. That is critical, we think, to our region's success. We have a number of other important regional transportation initiatives at play. I'm working with groups to bring the Capitol Trail, which I got to work on in Richmond, but it's a 55-mile uninterrupted trail. We're working to bring that down the peninsula to Fort Monroe. We're also working to bring that over the ferry in Jamestown and connect into the south side, and hopefully tap into the railroad right away and take it to the Virginia Beach oceanfront. So that's something that we're really excited about. Imagine if we could market over 100 miles of continuous uninterrupted trail. And if any of you haven't been along Route 5 and seen the Virginia Capitol Trail, it's a great Sunday afternoon drive that even better to walk or bike. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. Passenger rail enhancements. We now have an additional train to the south side in Norfolk. So we have 2 intercity trains on the south side. We're looking for a 3rd one, but we really need better improvements to the rail system between our region and RVA so we can tap into the emerging Northeast corridor. So that's a key legislative priority for us. And then finally, and I'm going to transition and turn it over to Kevin, what you saw that happened in 2013, that money we could only invest in roads, tunnels, and bridges. What happened the last General Assembly session is Kevin and I joined our partners from HRT and William Harrell. And finally, at long last, our region has money, about $30 million a year, to spend on the Regional Transit Fund. We think roads, tunnels, and bridges was the proof of concept of how localities can come together. We now want to transfer that model to public transportation. And Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell a little bit of that story before we open up for conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. I think the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund is just a continuation of part of the roles, responsibilities, and authorities that our legislative forefathers granted to the creation of HR TAC. We have the ability to do not only road, bridge, and tunnel projects for expansion, but we also can contract with others for transit and rail services. So we have we're like a small Department of Transportation for our region. And in some instances, we have more leverage than the state does because of our free money that we have coming in, where the states is locked up. We call it the lockbox of formula apportionment. We have the ability through the grantor's tax, which is 6 cents per hundred, and a regional transient occupancy tax to see ourselves moving forward as well as off the top of the statewide recordation tax, we get $20 million also from the state collection. So thank you for those down in Cumberland Gap, Virginia, and Bristol, Virginia, and Appalachia that are buying and selling houses, because that recordation tax, a little piece of that's coming to us. So thank you for your contribution out there. But a lot of our again, when we went to the legislature with that, our point was, you know, we've got people in public transit that are going to the Navy base, they're going to the Port Authority to work, you know, a lot of labor jobs, laboring jobs, that is, wage jobs, support the port industry, which is the economic engine for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. So I want to give Louise Lucas and Delegate Askew, the senator and the delegate, a big kudos for running this through with us, and also protecting the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund while they were, shall we say in a slang term, scarfing revenues for us here in the region. We are developing the program and policy for this with HRT. Bob Crum has a role over at the TPO on setting up a planning committee to help work forward in the collective reasoning of a strategic plan for transit, which I think is a great opportunity for the region, as well as we at HR Tech, through our 6 mayors of HRT jurisdictions, will manage that program. We already have the funds invested. We have about $22 million we received already. And just for those of you out there in the financing world, HR Tech is myself, a staff of 2 people, have a bond fund accountant and an executive assistant. I think I checked yesterday. We have $2.2 billion of cash that we have invested in a ladder portfolio in the market right now, in addition to our $5.5 billion of over $4 billion is obviously ours in project construction agreements. So it just goes to show that if there's a will, there's a way. And also, as we move forward, the new way of thinking in government is to be as mean and lean as possible and do the best we can in these collaborative efforts. So that's kind of how I wanted to close today, open up for a lot of questions. Someone asked earlier in the chat room, yes, that capacity for the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is part of a 44-mile long Hampton Roads Express Lanes network that HR Tech has control over, not only control over the network, but the tolling policy, and also the development of the segments that are prioritized, which have already been prioritized. Thank you, Bob, for your courageous efforts to move that through earlier this year at the TPO. So we're not the type of people that ring and run. You better watch out and answer the door, because we're going to be here a while, actually improving the region and moving forward with the best interest of everyone in mind. And again, it's all about quality of life and economic vitality for our region. So thank you. And Bob, if you have any closing comments, certainly turn the floor over to you, and Sarah, back to you being the host of this. And thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, Sarah, we're really excited to have the conversation. So let's see what questions there might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you actually answered Charles's question, but Charles, you had one earlier on about the old high-rise bridge. So Charles, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you. What's going to happen to the old high-rise bridge? Are you guys planning to tear it down, or
well,
what's the plan for that?
Let me talk about the high-rise bridge, and Bob, you can talk about the plans for the future. The existing high-rise bridge has 24 years of useful life left in it. Charles, you're asking the right question. So when we looked at this, as Bob said, it's well in excess of a $2 billion project to replace both bridges and actually do it right. But Charles, what we found was, again, we're spreading regional money across the region. We felt that we could achieve a greater vision working with Bob and his team, and also VDOT and their team. And we split that project into 2 phases, Charles. One phase is the existing high-rise bridge stays in place and the new bridge is built and maintained. Remember, Bob, you said earlier, it only opens twice a month. So why would we spend another $1+ billion to replace that bridge? Because we would have to tear that bridge down. You know, you kind of go, well, you're doing the entire project now for about $500 million. Why is it going to cost over $1 billion? And the answer is we have to remove the existing bridge out of a navigable waterway, and also right in the middle of wetlands of the tidal basin of the Chesapeake. So that, Charles, is why we're doing that. So that bridge will stay in place. You'll have the traditional singing of your tires going westbound. The eastbound bridge will be uninterrupted. So for twice a month, we're going to shut you down for like less than 10 minutes. And normally we try to make sure that that's scheduled for nighttime crossings. of course, you know, for the tide for what it is and the moons for pulling on us, we have to work with Mother Nature on that. But we try to schedule it so that we're not opening the bridge during inconvenient times. The only reason why that bridge is open today is Skanska has a laydown yard and a large barge with a 90-foot crane on it that they move around from time to time. I think they call it Big Bertha. And that barge is what causes that bridge to be opened. Otherwise, there's not enough marine traffic, Charles, for that bridge to need to be open because it's all clear underneath the bottom of the beam of the movable bridge. So, Bob, you want to talk a little bit about how we split it out and then where we're going with the median? That was a great question, Charles. Thanks.
Sure. So what you'll see for about the first 20 years is, Charles, you will see your existing bridge, you know, which will be down towards Bowers Hill. It's going to be lower than the new one, right? So what we've done is we've modeled that, and that's showing throughput going to be pretty good to the year 2040. So rather than spending the money on high-rise bridge phase 2 right now, we're going to look at whether there's money to apply some other regional needs. Some of those that we're modeling are, if we get the Bowers Hill, maybe we need to look at widening the whole way to Monitor Merrimack Bridge Tunnel. I see Councilmember Rouse on for Virginia Beach. We have the Independence Interchange that we're moving traffic through 264 now, which we're excited about down the Wichita, but boy, we're really moving a lot more traffic to a congestion point you have. We got to look at Independence. City of Norfolk would really like us to look at that Northampton Boulevard interchange, right? So we have so many other needs right now. So that's what we're trying to balance. So I hope that answers your question, Charles. Great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, thank you guys. That really was. And by the way, for our audience, we have two of the absolute best minds when it comes down to transportation and planning, and they're brilliant. So we are so grateful to you both for your time today. Now, Medbib, you had an interesting question about the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion. It was kind of touched upon with the Capitol Trail, but would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I think it was answered somehow briefly, but I wanted to ask how it integrates pedestrian and bike life somehow to make the structures livable, not only passable by car.
I'll take a shot at that for you. Medbib, thank you very much for your question. It's certainly something we try to address as Bob's talking about his great work with the Capitol Trail. And where you're going, Bob, I think is a very innovative approach with that. Our challenge on this particular project is that it's part of the interstate highway system. And we are using one of the largest boring machines, other than the double stack bore up in Tacoma, Washington, which was a little bigger. I think theirs was a 52-foot bore. Ours is going to be 46 to 49, somewhere in that range when they finally engineer it out. It's under design for construction in Europe now. Our challenge first of all, we were constrained on the size, the diameter, you know, the size of the tunnel bore requires us to have an emergency escape way for the public. But due to the fact it's part of the interstate highway system, we couldn't put a walkway to allow bike and ped to run through it. So, Bob, you've come up with a great concept to kind of alleviate some of the pressure points of our water crossings. And Bob, I'll let you talk about the great work you're doing with the Capitol Trail, because there's a very elaborate trail system in Hampton Roads, much more than what most people realize. It utilizes a lot of our abandoned railroad lines, both at the local jurisdictional level. And I think, again, Bob, you're trying to pull all that together in a collaborative way as to how, you know, you can do the great work that you and I did in Richmond on the Capitol Trail, especially the last mile I was involved in very, very keenly. And Bob, you want to talk about the Capitol Trail and what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so I think that the opportunity we are limited by some federal regulations and honestly safety issues for pedestrian mobility through that tunnel on the interstate system. However, related to bringing the Capitol Trail down the peninsula to Fort Monroe, we think that there's keen opportunities for park and ride situations with our transit system, where you'd be able to place your bicycles on the buses and take your way and come through the tunnel and then be able to go back and forth south side to Peninsula. We didn't talk a whole lot about the transit vision, but where we're at with that money that Kevin talked about is we are working with HRT to build out what we're calling a regional backbone transit system. We're going to call it the 757 Express. So imagine 13 routes around Hampton Roads that interconnect our city and localities irrespective of municipal borders. 15-minute service levels, amenities like bus stops and shelters that interconnect and move our people in a cohesive way. And part of that important backbone is going to have to be transit movement through those tunnels. So that's where I think we have the opportunity. You know, if you think about transit riders, we all start as either pedestrians or bike riders, right? So if we can establish a way to move people across the water with finally an interconnected transit system, that could be a huge step for us. And if I may, Sarah Jane, I want to say, you know, part of the exciting work I get to do is collaborating with these economic development departments in all the cities and counties. The one thing that really holds us back right now is the lack of a regionally integrated transit system. When the Amazons come knocking, and they did, you know, one of the first things, you know, where's your workforce? Do you have sites ready for development? How do we move them around? Because they're going to tell you within the first 15 minutes that their big workforce, they all don't all want to be in an automobile, right? And they want choice. And right now we don't have that. What Kevin talked about with that regional transit money, this is a moment in time and an opportunity that we're really, really excited about. So sorry, Sarah Jane, but I just want to provide that info.
No, thank you so much. That is awesome insight. We really do appreciate that. So we've got our next question. And just so you all know, I've been writing everybody down. We're going to get you out on time, but I want to make sure everybody's question is answered. If for some reason you have something burning at the very end of this, I know that Bob and Kevin will be happy to answer those and we can email them and get them back to you. Captain David Dees, are you able to unmute yourself?
I am, thank you. Hey, Captain Dees here, or just call me Dave, I don't care. XO of Naval Station Norfolk, and I might be asking a question I kind of already know the answer to. First, hey, I really appreciate the shift you guys have done, and I'd love to see this kind of approach with the sea level rise and some of those other large infrastructures programs, and I'm extremely jealous of your ability to tax people. I'm not allowed to do that as people come through the gate, which hurts my ability to fix things like buildings on base. With that, the question really is, as you increase that throughput of Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and you know, we aren't adding a new exit at Bay Avenue, everyone's going to continue to get off at Fourth View. Has there been any consideration of, as you look at additional projects, of that additional exit at Bay Avenue so the people getting off actually can go into gate 4 there? Because I'll tell you, they're not going to drive all the way down to 564. They're going to get off and go through those neighborhoods. And during COVID, that's exactly what we saw. And unfortunately, our only option over there is gate 10, which is a 1-lane, 2-lane gate. It's not a real gate, which I'm just afraid you build this beautiful thing. We have more people move to Hampton and Newport News and such, and then we're causing backups onto the interstate because the gate structure and the exits don't really align.
Yeah, so Kevin, I'll take that one. We are taking a look at some of those interactions in our long-range transportation plan and working with our local cities. We have some of those same issues we've got to be sensitive to in the city of Hampton on the peninsula as well. So, no, excellent point. Yes, some things we're looking at in terms of improvements that can be made there. Fortunately, in addition to Kevin's money, we have a little bit of money that comes to our region that we manage through the TPO, and we're going to be looking at potential candidate projects. Clearly, we got to be able to move people to your base efficiently, effectively, and make certain that that works for you and for our region. So I appreciate that comment, and this is really timely because I will be certain that we're modeling that we'll be certain to take a close look at that for you.
And COVID showed that they didn't actually go down to 564 even when there was no backup. They all just got off and went to those gates.
Yeah, most direct route, right?
Exactly. So thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Dees. The next question from Jane Glasgow.
Hi, I know you talked, I've talked a lot about the major projects that are going on right now, but I have a question about a project that went on previously, and I don't believe that you all, I don't know exactly how it all happened, but thinking about the downtown and the midtown tunnels, and the challenges that the increasing tolls have created and the lack of, I guess because it's a private partnership, any potential for changes on that? I know for many of the families that I work with that those tolls create a really big issue, a financial barrier, even things like accessing healthcare if they have to come through the tunnel to come to CHKD or something along those lines. So just wondered, what the long range opportunities are for that.
Jane, can I take a shot at that, Sarah Jane, if that's okay? Jane, you raise a very good point. ERC is a household acronym, it's a household word. Most of the time it's ERC with a couple explicitives behind it. When I talk to most people, it has been one of the most challenging to me and the most cannibalistic to quality of life projects that could have ever occurred. And I say that publicly, so I just did here. The challenge we have with the ERC agreement is that Macquarie Skanska did this deal with the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's locked and loaded. It has a profit margin built into it. If the Commonwealth cancels that agreement for convenience, then there's a massive profit that is actually given to Macquarie Skanska or the owner of ERC. It's called the Elizabeth River Crossings Operating Company, LLC. That's who owns this contract. So when COVID hit, Macquarie Skanska got together, and Macquarie, who also runs the Dulles Greenway. Any of you, I don't know, Dr. Dees or others who have ever been up in the Dulles area up to the Pentagon and gone west towards Dulles Airport, just west of there is this greenway called Dulles Greenway, and it's an extension of the Dulles Toll Road. The challenge there is Macquarie has said with Skanska that they want to get out of the tunnel business, and obviously ERC went on the market. It was published publicly this morning that Transurban and another company have both put binding offers in to purchase ERC Op Company LLC. It wasn't without this region, myself, Bob, and the leadership, and I'll let Bob, you talk to this about the great work that y'all did at the TPO. We looked at every corner we could possibly dust out, Jane Glasgow, where we could go in with the Commonwealth of Virginia and cancel that contract for convenience and reopen that facility into a publicly controlled facility. Because the unfortunate piece of this right now is that there's about $1.5 billion worth of debt that has a toll rate covenant attached to it, which means it's kind of like a mortgage amortization schedule on your home mortgage. Well, that's what they do at toll roads. It has toll increases. It has a tolling paradigm that's very painful, and it has to be followed, or the current holder of that debt has the ability to be called in default of it. So the challenge we have here is that none of us, Virginia or HR TAC, had the ability to develop enough free cash to go after this, what has been valued at about a $2.5 billion transaction, which will occur and probably close by the end of this calendar year. So you're going to get Macquarie Skanska is going to be shown a one-way ticket out of town through this sale, hopefully. And then the new buyer, Transurban or whomever that has gone in with this binding offer, will be your new landlord and also your new toll taker. Hopefully, because they do a great job in Northern Virginia, if Transurban is successful, they will still be bound by the toll rate covenant and will still be bound by these compensation events and other things that have impacted us in the region. And I know we don't have enough time, Sarah Jane, to get into this, but you can understand my passion on this is that I tend to be more of a mission-driven solutions guy, and I just haven't figured out what the right solution is yet, Jane Glasgow. But I will assure you that every leader of the 14 jurisdictions that I work for, and I work for all the mayors and chairs, Bob has a few more, he has 17, I have 14 of them. I will tell you, this is the number one priority project when it comes time to deal with the effect, not only to the region, but most directly to Portsmouth and Norfolk, into what this has done to our region. And when I say done to it, it's because of the detrimental effects of what could have probably been handled in a $200 million investment by the Commonwealth that has now become decades of misery for all of us, including me, because I have to pay when I go through there.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you so much. And if as you go through this, you see articles and you want to share them, we can continue to keep that conversation going with the class as well. So feel free to share as you go through. The next question that we have coming up is from Frank Byron. We have 3 more people with questions. I know we're getting close to that lunch hour, but I feel like these are really important. Frank, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, gentlemen. Excellent presentation. My question is probably quick and maybe easy to answer. What is the impact of sea rise or the expected sea rise been on these projects and probably our transit system around the entire area as well beyond just these projects?
Yeah, no, thank you. So we so we've done a lot of modeling where we've taken sea level rise scenarios and we've overlaid them on our regional transportation network. Through the Planning District Commission, Hampton Roads is one of the only places in the country that have adopted uniform sea level rise scenarios, a 1.5 foot sea level rise increase in the short term, 3 feet in the midterm, and 4.5 feet in the long term. So with having those uniform scenarios that are used across the region for planning and design, we've been able to overlay those on the regional transportation network. The impact on these interstate projects is minimal. And when I say minimal, as you're very aware, flooding comes from 2 sources. The water is rising, the tide comes in, but the water also falls, okay? So for these big projects Kevin and I are talking about, we're not seeing substantial impacts, but when you start looking at collectors and lesser level arterials, Shore Drive, Hampton Boulevard, those are some places we're seeing really, and then when you get to the more localized roads, you're seeing really significant impacts over the next 10, 20, and 30 years. So those are some of the places that we really are collectively trying to step up those considerations. We've done some work with Virginia Beach and Norfolk, and we've identified project needs to address sea level rise related to our road network. And we're trying to move forward to find some implementation funding to get some of those projects constructed. So yeah, that's a great question, because there are some places, you know, back to Naval Station Norfolk, right? I mean, there are days on Hampton Boulevard where it doesn't have to rain. If the wind is blowing the wrong way and the tide's coming in, we got blue sky flooding. And I know Shore Drive, Councilman Rouse sees a lot of the same issues, right? So
yeah.
Just a little background information. We could do a whole session, Sarah Jane, for you on our sea level rise work.
Don't think we won't be calling you back. All right, Aaron, you're up next.
Be very quick. Thank you, Robert and Kevin, for your presentation. As you know, as a commissioner for the HRT, I understand just how important the regional fund is to making sure we can, you know, increase and improve our transportation around here. Could you just a bit explain to my classmates, because I just want to make sure they understand just how important regional collaboration is in the state of Virginia. When you look at us, at our state as a whole, Northern Virginia is kicking our butt when it comes to the funding and transportation. So could you just touch on that just a bit on how important this regional fund is, how important it is to have regional collaboration to really get those state funding down here in Hampton Roads?
No, absolutely. So let me use transit a primary example, just one example. So let's look at what we have today. Hampton Roads Transit serves 7 different cities, right? But it's really not a regionally funded transit system. And what I mean by that is we can have City A, and City A says, this is how much I have to give to HRT. And HRT structures the services within that city to meet that city's needs, what they can afford and what they desire. Then they go over to the next city, and that city might have less money, okay? And then the next city might have more money. So what you start to have is routes that, so if I have to take transit to work, in City A, the route might run from 9 to 5. In City B, the route might run from 9 till midnight. And then in the next city, it might just be in the middle of the day. I can't move around if I'm transit dependent. I can't move around if I'm a choice rider in that type of a system. So what Mr. Rouse is pointing out is, that's the power of collaboration. We never were, until this year, able to stand up unified as a region, go up to the General Assembly and say, we're going to lock arms and say we all need regional transit funding. And that, with the leadership of Delegate Askew and Senator Lucas, courageous leadership, as Kevin pointed out, is what moved that through the General Assembly. The same thing, to Mr. Rouse's point, happened, Kevin, in 2013. If you go back to, Kevin, right around 1999, 2000, there was this really interesting idea, and it was, let's create a regional taxing fund so we can build HRBT and other needed projects. It failed. It never made it through. It fell by referendum. Our residents did not vote for it. Kevin, if we could build HRBT back in 2000, what do you think the cost would have been as compared to 3.8 billion?
It would have been in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
So,
that Monitor Merrimack came in at about $500 million. And that wasn't that long ago. Monitor Merrimack, by terms of a tunnel system, is a new tunnel.
Yeah.
It was in the 1990s, Bob.
Yeah. So, Mr. Rouse, to your point, right? We weren't speaking as a region at that point, but we are now. And the longer we wait to speak as a region on these things, it costs us more money. I mean, that the data is the data. So I think that the new 757 is that we are now speaking as a region. And we need to carry this through with transit, because if we can build that regional transit backbone, I don't think there's anything that can hold us back.
Yeah, and Bob, to that point, if I can just follow up on that, because I think it's a great question. I actually was and I don't want to bring my previous career life into this, but I started my life as a transit general manager in Virginia. And that was back in the days of Pintran and TRT, and went through that merger. And I spent 22 and a half years with the transit agency in Virginia. So I can talk a lot about the collaborative effort and the emphasis of that, especially with public transit. I think public transit has been in the past, and I've always been saying this, and it's great that you gave me an opportunity through your question to get on my soapbox for a minute, but public transit needs to stop being treated as a transportation alternative and start being treated as a transportation component to the solution that we're facing. Not everyone can afford to ride in an automobile, but those who can't can afford to ride on a bus. And the bus has to have a reliable trip, just like our highway system for our congestion efforts. How do we work that together? And how do we put that together? And I think, I was just recently, and it came out today in an international paper known as Bond Buyer. There's an entire, for those of you not involved in finance, there's an entire world of finance that most of us will never see in our lives, but it's the amount of infrastructure financing and money that moves globally on a daily basis. And what was interesting was that Bond Buyer, it's a national, international magazine, said in their press this morning, they went out and got some national and internationally renowned economists to take a look at our region. And what they said about the HRBT project was just amazing. This is doing this project in the midst of the pandemic will reflect the kinds of investments and job generators that projects like this could be. During times of diminished economic conditions, the project is sort of that of a tailor-made product that will at least generate a local stimulus during the economic times brought about by COVID. And another, if you think about that and how you put things together, and another economist in the same article said, this is the kind of thinking that our nation needs when Congress is in gridlock over the next stimulus package. Hampton Roads is moving forward with confidence to develop these types of mega projects when our congressional arm of government of the entire United States can't make up its mind. And I think that, that is what I want everyone in Civic to take home with them today, is that we are now, from a transportation infrastructure perspective, and the presentation you've seen today, and your great questions, and also about regional collaboration, we would not be doing any of this if this region did not have the collaborative courage to park their inherent and sometimes conflicting views and jurisdictional opinions to understand that arguing amongst ourselves gets us nowhere, but arguing together for a greater vision has a magnitude of outcomes in a positive way. And I think, Bob, you've been a great part of that. And I think I'm very proud when I say every one of you here, because I know a lot of you, have also been, in your own way, key contributors to the success that we've talked about today.
Kevin, that was beautifully said. Thank you. Our very last question is from Cullen Strawn. We really appreciate you all going over a little bit with us. These are important topics. Cullen, you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sarah Jane. And really mine is more an expression of deep thanks regarding the Capitol Trail. My family and I moved here five and a half years ago, and we're a little disheartened to learn about the state of bike trails, in the area. And we only learned about the Capitol Trail last year. Then when the pandemic hit, we decided to go up there and take a few weekends and eventually do the whole thing with a few round trip legs added together. Now we had to have, a hitch and a bike carrier and a vehicle in order to do it. But just wanted to let you know, I was very, very pleased to hear about the idea of extending the trail further south of the water. And in general, in terms of bikeability in the area, I think anyone who rides a bike knows that putting the bicycle icon on a street is just not the same. Oftentimes, most of the time, the vehicle drivers, behave inappropriately and, excuse me. And also just wanted to let you know that I represent the arts at Old Dominion University, and there could be some really interesting conversations to be had about incorporating arts, into this expansion of creating a more bikeability in the area. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Cullen. And I want to say thank you so much. And that's kind of an exciting new project for you, Bob. So there you go. You've got artwork on the Capitol Trail. So we'll look forward to that meeting, right? Can I be part of that?
I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
I do too.
So what we're going to be doing is, if I may, Sarah Jane, just to conclude with that, the Capitol Trail goes back to when Governor Warner was in place, right? And it really was born, that idea was born in the 1990s. I was in Richmond from 2008 to 2015, got to work with Kevin Page and others, and we really were able to accelerate that trail construction. So there's no big pots of money out there, but what we're gonna have to do is start grabbing pots as we go, right? Segment by segment. So we're working to identify areas of low-hanging fruit where we can start to get this trail extended. And it's gonna be 3 to 5 miles at a time, but we think it can be just a huge, huge asset for this region and for this area. So something we're really, really excited about.
Well, quality
and
of
if
life
I can,
No, go ahead, Kevin, sorry.
Yeah, Sarah Jane, if I could just follow up on that, because Cullen, I think your name was, the Capitol Trail, and Bob and I worked pretty close on that during our tenures in our previous careers. And as you come into Richmond at Route 5 and you dip down along the James River and go through that, the Rockets Landing property, the Capitol Trail, believe it or not, that last 2 miles was it was a make or break there for a while. And then you go underneath the railroad bridge with the cover over top of it, that covered canopy. All of that was part of an 1896 deal that was made between the railroads and the city of Richmond. It was a great opportunity for us to get the right people with the right knowledge base together to go to the railroad and say, hey, we got you with this ordinance from 1896. But, that's the type of knowledge base that we have now working on the Capitol Trail extension to Hampton Roads. So, Bob, you're right. It's going to be that 3 to 5 mile segmentation. But I will say, Cullen, that you got the right people at the table here to make this collective, somewhat disconnected group of railroad beds that's the trail system now. And I really think, Bob, you've got the right head on your shoulders there to make it happen. And certainly with the railroad bed part, I'm happy to help you with. But Crum's got it, and it'll be a wonderful trip from Jamestown through to Hampton Roads, and I plan on using it. Although I don't ride a bicycle, I'm gonna find a way to ride a tricycle if I have to by the time this thing's built. So Bob, kudos to you, and Cullen, thank you for your support of the Capitol Trail, its extension in the trail system. Because just like transit that you brought out, Mr. Rouse, that it's all an integral part of our transportation network. It's something we have to not only cherish, but also value the development of as we make great decisions.
So Sarah, Jane, may I make just a quick comment? I promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I promise to be brief. So first off, thank you again. As you can tell, Kevin and I, we love telling this story. And there's so many more areas that we could talk with you about. Regional cooperation about broadband and fiber, regional cooperation around emergency management, around coordination among 17 local governments on response to COVID through your city managers and county administrators, even sharing of staffs or emergency response or water sharing agreements, and we could go on and on and on. Regional collaboration around offshore wind and how we're going to create a new industry and job base for our region. But the one thing that I learned from being in Richmond, and Kevin and I were up there during the whole creation of the RVA, is just the power of positive storytelling. And I think the big thing that I've learned through all this is that there is not another metropolitan region that's going to tell our story for us. And the more as our own region, if our outgoing face to the world is, well, nobody cooperates here. We're 17 local governments. I always say if we were a college football team, we wouldn't recruit very well, right? We've got to tell our own story. And Richmond somehow they caught that positive vibe. And I think for the 757 to really excel, we need to catch that here, right? That storytelling, the positive. We got problems, let's admit it, but we're also doing well in some areas. And I think that if there's one thing that all of us, Kevin and I have been here 5 years, but one thing we'd like to ask you all to do is, as the leaders in this community, let's start telling that positive story, because I think as that starts to grow exponentially, then we're really going to harness the potential of this fantastic region. So thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you so much. We appreciate everything you guys do. It is officially lunchtime now, and I know that Bob and Kevin are definitely very busy, and we can't thank you enough for staying on a little bit extra for all of these questions. And yes, please give them a big round of applause. I know we have to do it in the virtual format, but if we were in person, I'd give you a standing ovation right now. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your vision. And class, we will see you back here at 1 o'clock, ready for our afternoon sessions, actually starting off with the offshore wind conversation. So we're very excited about that. Gentlemen, thank you again for your time and for your leadership. Have fun at lunch, and we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. Don't forget, Zoom link is in Basecamp or on your calendar. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.